Okay, always difficult to finish as the last man, and specifically after I'm not impressed by the lights. I'm impressed by Neil Basu and other folks who have said some very interesting things, but still I'm going to be a little bit more disruptive. Agree with you, dear Honorable Neil Basu, that we need to talk also about prevent, and I will go a little bit further. I think we need also to talk about prevention, coming from the expression prevention of conflicts. What does that mean? That means addressing the structural reasons, not the root causes as we talk about them usually, poor guys, victims of racism and so forth. All these factors do play a role from a human perspective, but actually there are other reasons, other topics that we need to talk about. That's why the title of my humble presentation today is the need to understand the DNA of the threat and the importance of the ecosystems. Ecosystem is an expression that I used when I was testifying in the European Parliament Commission on Terrorism last year. And I think they were interested, the 60 MEPs, in what I meant by the ecosystem. The ecosystem is actually the environment in which those young kids that my honorable colleagues have talked about, and it plays definitely a role in what we have seen happening in Belgium. Once again, Belgium is not the UK. Europe is not the United States or Australia. We do have different dynamics. And communities, as I've always said, are functioning in a completely different way. A Pakistani community is not a Somali community. A Moroccan community is not, let's say, a Nigerian community, and so forth. So we need to be a little bit more nuanced when we talk about these kind of things. And by the way, before I start my presentation, there's no such thing as Islam. A lot of folks talk about Islam in different conferences. I do a lot of conferences around the world on both sides of the Atlantic. Islam. What is Islam? Doesn't exist. If you want to take the example of Morocco, in Morocco they follow a different school of thought. It's called Al-Madhab al-Maliki, the Maliki rite, okay? So the software is completely different from the Wahhabi software, for example, and you can go on and on. Couple of things, just to set the framework, to remind some people what we are talking about. These are a few pictures. I hope you see them. This is the Malbec subway station. This is one of the 2 terrorist attacks that we have experienced since 22nd of March. It gives you an idea of how powerful the blast was. I was on the spot. As I'm speaking to you right now, I still have the smell of the explosives of TATP in my nose as I'm speaking to you right now. You can see the power of the explosion. You can see the lab working. These are pictures I've taken, let's say 1 hour after the explosion. And based on that, you can imagine in what state we found the victims. And I'm showing these pictures for one specific reason, in the name of those who died. And I hope they haven't died in vain. And that's why I am expressing myself with the same passion as Neil Basu, except that I am outraged. And I will tell you why in a couple of minutes. We found victims in hundreds, literally hundreds of small pieces of human flesh. And I think the Israelis will understand what I'm talking about when they went through this terrible series of explosions. I think it was 17 years ago. There were like 1,000 people, explosions in buses and so forth. So they know what I'm talking about. Airport, it was the same thing. Why am I outraged? Because we have, in different conferences and venues and reports, forgotten to talk about 3 things, 3 root causes of terrorism. First of all, denial. Some people will go like, what? Denial? Second one is naivete. I hope the word is pretty much the same in English. And the third one is political correctness or calculus. Sometimes you have the combination of the 3. When the 3 are combined, they become dangerous. They're just like TATP. Okay? I am saying it with passion because actually I am from some communities that we're talking about. So this gives me a little bit of legitimacy for my outrage. What do I see here? Let me say one thing. Quote, one very high-level European specialist politician decision maker. He said in 2015 to actually some Israeli friends who are sitting right here, Ophir in the back, for us it's new, 2015, this type of terrorism. Are we kidding? Are we serious? You remember Ophir? We talked about it yesterday again. I call it the continuum. Look at the pictures. Just to make it simple for some people. started in 28 with Hassan al-Banna in Egypt, the founder of Muslim Brotherhood. So it's a long time ago, before Second World War. And then we have Sayyid Qutb. I remember walking down the street in some marketplaces where the cassettes, because in those days there were no digital supports, of Sayyid Qutb were sold in the market. So people were just bathing in his speeches. We're talking about like 35, 40 years ago. The next one, the Honorable Al-Khomeini, who messed up the lives of different communities around the Arab and Islamic world. And then the next one, Bin Laden. And then somebody said, I think it was President Obama, with all due respect, and one evening, I will never forget that, with a big smile, ladies and gentlemen, the United States has localized and neutralized and killed Osama bin Laden. Some people thought, I'm talking about the naive people, you know, in my country and other neighboring countries, it's the end of terrorism. It was not the end of terrorism. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of the next one. The next one, look on the top of the picture very quickly. You have Commander Massoud, who was neutralized and killed by a terrorist who was prepared in Brussels, in Molenbeek, the same place where the Bataclan was pretty much thought about and prepared. What's the link? The lady next door, Malika El Aroud, considered as the mother of all jihadis. She's a completely crazy, radicalized lady who is now sitting in jail, has driven us crazy. She married the killer of Commander Massoud in Molenbeek. She was married by Sheikh Bassam, a Syrian, cleric in Molenbeek. What's the link between all those folks? Oh, forgot, sorry. Last but not least, al-Baghdadi, who is still alive. So what's the link between Hassan al-Banna, Sayyid Qutb, and al-Baghdadi? The link is the following one. The software, as I like to call it. That is to say, the ideology. We have been saying on TV, and some politicians for the last years and decades, and certainly since 9/11, we have destroyed, or we are destroying, or we will be about to destroy terrorism. I'll tell you what, folks, with all respect, it's the end of the day, we haven't destroyed anything. We have been killing terrorists, neutralizing, droning people, and they are still around. This map from the Threat Analysis Agency in Belgium shows, and this is just part of the map because I didn't have enough space, to put the world map. Because actually, if you look at the Southeast Asia, it's a disaster in Indonesia and so forth. Look at all the groups. I would say, humoristically, $3 trillion away from the start. That is to say, in the days of 9/11. We're still struggling with all this stuff. Okay, not operating. Next one. An important thing, at the bottom on the left, something that a lot of people forget to talk about because of political correctness, calculus, blah, 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 and so forth. I will dare to speak about it because I'm outraged in the name of all the folks who died and those who are still victimized by what I call foreign involvement in community management. Are we alone? I'm talking about the Europeans. There are a bunch of Europeans right here. Are we alone to deal with our communities in our countries? How naive is that? We are not alone. As we are, as local and national government, talking about certain communities, at the same time, a few thousand kilometers away, there are folks trying to figure out what to do with our communities. And I'll get slowly to the idea or the concept that I put forward in the European Parliament Commission on Terrorism, the ecosystem. Look at the picture in the middle. Who made that picture? Anybody has any idea if Professor Azani was around here? By the way, he's a fantastic guy who will be talking in the next couple of days. I recommend his teachings and the way he explains things, better than me, believe me. This has been made by Abu Mus'ab al-Suri, a genius, dangerous guy who wrote a manifesto around 2006, was working with bin Laden, with al-Zarqawi and all the gang. And at the end, he was such a good scholar, he designed a system, to put it mildly in a very simplistic way, why train terrorists somewhere in the world and then fly them over to actually carry out, terrorist attacks? Just take their own kids, train them inside their countries, organize them in a disruptive way, that is to say, not in a hierarchical way like ETA or IRA. You get one, you get the rest of the gang. Look at the lines or the circles. He calls it the circle of da'wah. You have the central circle, the second one, the third one, and around them you have something that for me, is absolutely critical in our approach, because we have talked and done lots of things except this one, that is to talk about the ecosystem and what drives the dynamics within certain communities. And once again, what I'm saying is valid for Belgium, for a few neighboring countries and continent, and certainly not to be compared with, for example, Dearborn, Michigan. You know, one of my friends in the US said, oh, look how fantastic it is in Dearborn, Michigan, the integration, the sheriff, the head of the police. Actually, the Arabs living there and the Muslim community have nothing to do with, for example, the folks we have in Molenbeek. Molenbeek has nothing to do with the Pakistanis in London, for example. Why? In Molenbeek, we have tribal folks, you know, from the north of Morocco. They are Berbers. They are not even Arabs. They speak a specific dialect that they ended up coding, you know, during the terrorist attacks and so forth. So not to be compared. The ecosystem. Excuse me, just very important on top of it. The title of that slide comes from Abu Mus'ab al-Suri. Nizam la Tanzim in Arabic. I translated that freely, a system, not an organization. Why is it interesting? It's a systemic idea. If you, just like in management, we talk about systemic things, not an organization. What does that mean? If you try to arrest the whole gang, you will not be able to do it because they don't know each other sometimes. They're not connected and so forth. So it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Look at this map from the Threat Analysis Agency in Belgium. When you see the concentration of these small red dots, actually it's all the categories of foreign fighters that are living in the country. The biggest concentration is in the middle, Brussels, and then you have Antwerp on top. And these balls, you can consider them as ecosystems. All right? That means to say that you have specific communities who are being the victims themselves of specific foreign involvement and who have been victims also of different socioeconomic reasons, factors, and so forth. The combination of all that stuff gives you a perfect environment for disseminating hateful speech, doing certain number of things, buying, selling guns, and so forth. This is a map. I will just show it quickly. There's not much you can do with it, you know, because actually some individuals are so small. This is one of the things that we have started, you know, working on during the attacks. It gives you an idea of the concentration of people around each person and so forth. It's huge. That is to say, the paradigm has changed. Everybody knows that. Saying it is one thing, trying to figure out what to do with it is another one. So that's why the prevention of conflict, fully agree. On top of it, prevention. It comes from the 60s. It's called prevention of conflicts. I would like to use that expression that I've used for other circumstances. That is to say, to address the dynamics inside the communities because there are different actors. This slide is about the naivete. I would like to say this in this honorable and very important conference. We have a tendency in the West to analyze those folks from the Middle East or from Middle Eastern origins with our Western eyes. Does that make sense? Stop me if I'm saying something stupid. I don't think so. That's why I'm saying it in a very assertive way. We try to use a matrix of analysis that we use for other topics or with our Western eyes, and we ask the Israelis, they know about it, and we try to expect or to figure out that those folks will react based on our values. I'm not talking about the democratic values. I'm talking about how do you expect a Norwegian guy to react? Okay, you expect the same from a Palestinian guy or Moroccan guy or an Egyptian guy. How naive could that be? Misunderstanding the perspective cultures and the perspective sensibilities. That's the reason why I put this disruptive picture, da'wah. You have folks who are talking in certain places that don't have a clue what they are talking about. If it's just folks, so far so good. If it's decision makers and politicians, which I deal with regularly, it's a little bit annoying because they take decisions, they give you budgets or they take away budgets and so forth. And that becomes at some point a little bit dangerous. Our best practice, and I will talk about 2-3 takeaways, I'm almost done, is the local task force. In pain, in the blood that has been shed. On 22nd of March, we finalized and consolidated a couple of good practices. One of the good practices in each region or city. Remember the balls? Yeah, 2 minutes, thank you. It's too important. I know these people are hungry, but we are hungry for truth as well. We have all police departments, including the small ones, local police departments, because we believe, after our painful experience, that we believe in the grassroots approach. Whatever that may be, everything that's grassroots is the most important. We have the prosecutors, we have all the intelligence services, everybody around the table every single month. I think the UK is very, very good at that with the intelligence handling model, so we are doing our own intelligence handling model. I believe, as Neil Basu believes in certain things, in the community approach, in the issue of the ecosystems. I believe in community intelligence in the most noble way, because we believe, and I truly strongly believe, that we can solve the issue of terrorism with the help of communities. In communities you have evil people, but you have also people who are fed up with all that stuff. Since 9/11, I will dare to say this very overtly, I remember, that's the reason why the honorable gentleman mentioned when I was working in the north of Brussels, at that moment it was 9/11. People were cheering on the streets. Did you hear me? Cheering and happy. Most of them, the vast majority in certain communities. Why? Because they were bathing in those days in what we call in French l'épopée. You know, the magic of Bin Laden. Bin Laden was just a picture, a concept, and so forth. And the software that's behind it, that's the ideology, was actually very attractive. I was talking to a colleague from the UK not long ago, a few years ago. He's also from, I think, the Metropolitan Police. He's a Muslim, actually. You probably know him. We'll talk about it. He said to me very overtly in the restaurant, you know, actually, the vast majority of people I meet on the streets are actually in favor of Daesh. Are they terrorists? Are they supporting terrorism? The answer is no. They are bathing in what Professor Azani can explain, you know, the spirit of the dawah, the revenge. You know, you have to be Middle Eastern to understand that stuff. That's why I'm saying analyzing those folks with the matrix of the West is or could be a mistake. Complementary to that, we believe in that, and it's a very important takeaway, human intelligence, grassroots. It's nice to talk about technology, about NSA, about interception of emails and so forth. I used to say that in a very ironic way. You remember the terrorist attacks in Boston with the Tsarnaev brothers? They're brothers, like in Brussels, the Bakrawi brothers. Do you think brothers who are living in the same apartment, the same living room, would send each other an email to say, let's do this tomorrow? Do you think they'll send a WhatsApp, whatever? How ridiculous is that? That's the reason why I talk about the ecosystems. I will tell you today, if there's a guy from these tribes in Molenbeek who wants to do something, even in Paris or in Germany, he knows where to find the next person who has Kalashnikovs. All he has to do is go in the neighborhood, in the ecosystem, enter a cafe, sit down, ask the waiter, where's Mohammed or whatever his name is, and he'll tell you, he's coming in a couple of hours, drink tea with mint, talk in coded Berber dialect, which nobody can decipher in the planet, not even the US, with the NSA and so forth, and plan something, take a car, and go. The honorable gentleman from Germany, I liked also his explanation and presentation. He mentioned Amri, you know, the guy who did the terrorist attack in Berlin. Okay, do you know what he had his breakfast after the terrorist attack? In Brussels, in Gare du Nord, in the northern train station. He took a Flixbus, you know, one of these cheap buses, landed in Brussels at 6:30, or arrived in Brussels at 6:30, went to have a croissant with coffee, and then took another train and blah, 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 until he arrived in Italy, where he got killed. So that's how people get organized. People do not send WhatsApp and emails and so forth. Once again, I was last message, important one, in Canada, talking to the head of intelligence in Canada. He said to me and to the audience, whoever speaks about self-radicalization, I will get mad at him. You know why? Because, and ask the Moroccan intelligence services, and they're very good. They dismantled, 20 cells in the last 3 years. Because actually, there is always, you hear me well, a human contact before, during, or after the surfing on the internet. At some point, somebody talks to you or whispers in your ears, be it the baker or the butcher or your uncle, you're on the right path, young man, the dawah. and so forth, and so forth. And once again, Professor Azani can explain it to you. Very quickly, allow me 2 minutes, please. The canal approach, the canal plan. We discovered that one of the best ways, it's not a magical bullet, to approach these ecosystems is to undermine, their functioning and the way they function. Do they function on what? They function on drugs, on weapons, on fake documents, etc. All the logistics that you might need as a terrorist. A lot of terrorists have made a logistical stop in Molenbeek in those days. We call it the crescent. It actually looks like a crescent. It's an area, a very poor area. Socioeconomics are very bad around a canal in the western part of Brussels. We have a specific plan for that. It's ongoing. It's about, as you see it over there, prevention, an administrative approach, that is to say who lives where, who has what papers, illegal aliens and so forth, police approach, judicial approach, and so we attack or actually take action on drugs, illegal economy, arms, criminal networks, documents, and so forth. For example, some of the terrorists that were involved in the terrorist attacks in Brussels and Paris and so forth were using some fake papers. Some of them were made by an Algerian guy that we arrested. He had already made 5,000, roughly, fake papers disseminated already in Europe and so forth. So this is the kind of people we're talking about, the logistical aspect. The nexus crime terror, interesting for us. It's not the only one. We have to work on it. 86% of the targets we know have been at some point confronted to police. Two last elements. Benjamin Herman. How does he look like? See the name? Belgian guy, blue-eyed and so forth. He's a convert. All right? So he didn't know anything about Islam. He was in jail. He was a petty criminal. Was converted, in jail, radicalized, and left prison a little over a year ago and committed a terrorist attack in Liège, in the eastern part of the country. He executed 2 police officers with their own guns and then tried to kill many other people who got lucky, by the way. They just escaped and so forth. It was a drama. This is the illustration of what awaits us. I know that the Honorable Konix talked this morning about, everybody thinks about the returnees, those who will come back from Syria, blah, blah, blah. So we haven't seen much of that. Right now, very pragmatically, we are worried about the prison system. Those we have arrested, we have the highest number of arrests and sentencing, says the federal prosecutor, in Europe. So we have hundreds of folks in jail for small periods of time. If you can't actually prove that they have beheaded 250 people, or you can prove, member of a logistical network, blah, 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 it's all like 4 or 5 years. To 4 or 5 years, they'll leave jail and they are back on the streets. So these are the folks that we are working on right now, especially me. It doesn't give me yet, gray hair, but soon gray hair, because it's really an equation which is extremely complex. You have human rights, you have all kinds of things. So the prison system. Last but not least, the Iranian Shia issue. 4 years ago, I was talking about it with the EU Commission and other folks, and they were looking at me like I was an alien, all right? That's continental Europe. What are you talking about? This is not an issue. Where do you see an issue, by the way? Where do I see an issue? I'll say it today because I'm in Israel. 7 years ago, a Shia mosque in Brussels called Rida Mosque was burned down by a Sunni within the conflict, beginning of the conflict of Syria and so forth. The imam died, and then there was a burial. Thousands of people showed up at the burial. So I was responsible also for organizing, the public order aspect of that thing. And I was like, wow, who these folks are. The style. You can recognize the style of Shi'i, as we say in Arabic. Even the rings they have, the organization, very disciplined. What the hell is that? So at some point I saw people, diplomats from the Iranian embassy showing up next to the coffin and praying for the dead. All right. So I started investigating this thing with one of my intelligence services. So they gave me a great feedback. These folks, they know the who's who. We're going on scouts camps in the mountains, in Belgium, in the Ardennes, and they get messages and they get trained and brainwashed very slowly. You know the concept of the frog in the boiling water? Okay, so we're all frogs, for your information, for those who didn't realize that they were frogs. So everybody is like in this froggy atmosphere till we realized that something is happening. Then I started talking to the Moroccan diplomats, because most of those folks are Moroccans. And guess what they told me? In the last 10 years, based on their observations, thousands of Moroccans, I think the figure in those days, talking about 7 years ago, was between 15 to 20,000 people, were converted from Sunnism to Shiism. And believe me, a Sunni who becomes a Shia, it's much complex and much heavy than, for example, a Catholic who decides to be a Buddhist. It's a big leap forward. All right? So here they are. You have these people who have shifted to another religious environment, another country. I haven't even mentioned the other countries, but the list is fairly long. They are all on the same side of the world map. Everybody is taking care of communities. That's the reason why I speak about the role of geopolitics and about the instrumentalization, of European converts. In this case, I think I forgot his name, Mogaddam, the new dean, made a very interesting analysis of the proxies and so forth. I like this mechanism of analysis. So that's what I would like to relate to. We need to understand in Europe, in our countries, who's who in which community and who is influencing who. The dynamics, that's the reason why I talk about the ecosystem. Here in Europe, the German gentleman representing Mr. Seehofer, he overtly said, and I appreciate that, his intellectual honesty, it's historic for us, not for him. He let us understand that in Germany they have a big problem. But I'm letting you understand that in Belgium we started to have a problem a long time ago. Have they committed terrorist acts? Not yet. But, small detail, last year we arrested 2 terrorists, Iranian terrorists, on their way to Paris to plant a bomb. Last year. Real one with a real, not too big, but a bomb, TATP bomb and so forth. Piloted by an Iranian diplomat in another eastern country in Europe and so forth. So that's the reality. Is it severe? Right now, not. But if you ask the French 30 years ago, I remember when I was a teenager, I used to follow the situation in France, the terrorist attacks, organized and instrumentalized, by the Iranians. It was a rock and roll kind of period. Ask Monsieur Macron, because I think he's calculating that too in his strategic approach. So what might happen in 4 or 5 years, and that's my last message, we need to do strategic foresight. That is to say, as advisors, as police commissioners, we have to be in a position to gather as many information as we can from the grassroots, from the field, the mechanism of the communities. We should not be speaking about Islam in general or the communities of the terrorists. Please be nuanced. What are we talking about for which specific profile, which specific community, and so forth? As I'm speaking to you, the geopolitical approach is, I think, extremely important even in police and law enforcement work. That's the reason why I put under my title, Think Global, Act Local. That is to say, a cop or a police commissioner, and I know that most police commissioners are very good and very competent, but we need to integrate this global approach, the understanding, the nuances, sophisticated understanding of those dynamics, because when it moves in certain parts of the Middle East, you know what? It moves in our neighborhoods. Automatically. You don't have to wait months. You don't have to have a PhD in economics or philosophy or criminology, whatever, to understand that these things reverberate on the field. And I think Professor Boaz Ganor, that's my last comment, very eloquently explained that in his book that I recommend to everybody, which is Global Alert. He explained the dynamics of hybrid organizations, but specifically the instrumentalization of certain causes. For example, Daesh and all those groups and Al-Qaeda have used the Palestinian cause with kids who are 12 years old on the street. I remember demonstrations during the second Intifada in downtown Brussels, in the north of Brussels, of young kids who are just talking about Palestine. So I stopped some of them and said, where is Palestine, by the way? I said, well, I don't know, on the map, somewhere on the right side. That's all you know. And you're demonstrating and throwing stones in Brussels and so forth. You see, they're actually trying to use certain causes, Middle Eastern geopolitical causes, to actually galvanize more kids. So, do you guys have any questions? Happy to hear them. But last disruptive message, are we ready for the next disruptive wave? Because we have to be. I remember in 2015, some politicians said to me, oh, we are very much surprised by the Daesh move and so forth. Well, let me say this to you, and this is my final word. I am always surprised that people are surprised. Thank you very much.